Can you stop like Chris? Thank you.
Prepare for Dharma talk.
Good morning, everyone. So I had initially intended to give a talk around the topic I've been circling around for quite some time, which is how do politics fit into Zen practice? What do we do with politics? How do we behave? And then the Bob Dylan movie came out. And then I had a conversation with, I think he's considered the world's leading Dogen scholar, who had also written a book called Bargaining for Salvation, Bob Dylan, a Zen Master, ? And so I thought, I hadn't read this book yet, but I've been obsessed with Bob Dylan for 20-something years. And he had a little thing or two to do with politics. So I thought, okay, the talk kind of wrote itself. And I also, it turns out, I think the last few talks I've given, I think they've developed into a little bit of a series, a little bit of a sequence. So I'd like to highlight a couple of the points I made in the previous ones and link them to this one and see if they begin to feel cohesive in any way. Some time ago, I talked about this, what it means to read as Zen practitioners, because Zen is a tradition that has all kinds of books and literature as its history. And there's a danger in reading when we read in a way that confirms what we already believe. So a Zen practitioner, because they're already interested in Zen, might read a bunch of Zen texts and unknowingly filter out a bunch of stuff and only look for the things that they agree with already. And that's very human to do that. But good reading, or reading in the style of Zen, allows more stuff to get in there. And then I gave a talk about understanding, in which I really wanted to say that we, as embodied beings, we always understand the world in a particular way. That there is no there's no escape from the ways in which we understand the world. Otherwise, we wouldn't know what to do with a door when we saw one. We have to understand a door as something already. In the homework assignment of sorts that I gave was to say, it's a scenario. If, for example, you're going to a foreign country like Japan, and you really, really want to understand Japan, counterintuitively, the first thing you should do is read a book about US history, because that is the frame and lens which you will use to apply to Japan. So it's counterintuitive. Most people would say I should read Japanese history to understand Japan better, but here we're talking about understanding in a different level. So today's talk, I realize, has a background theme that I would name as freedom. So keep that in your minds as I talk. Like, what is freedom from the perspective of Zen? What does it mean to be free? And here are two Zen masters of old saying something about freedom. One must not act as one pleases. One must submit to all the restrictions. So that's Zen Master 1. And Zen Master 2 says to the assembly, when the great function works, it does not follow rules. So there you go. There's that Zen paradox we're always looking for. Follow all the rules and don't follow the rules. Okay, that's the background. So as I said, what prompted me to give this talk about Bob Dylan was seeing the film now out in theaters called The Complete Unknown. How many of you saw the film? Okay. Short blurb version is that it's a biopic that depicts Dylan's arrival in New York City when he was just a wee young buck of 21 or so, and then follows him for about 4 years and ends right around 1965. It doesn't take young Dylan much time upon arriving in New York City to consistently and publicly start writing protest songs or songs focused primarily on social injustice, and people recognizing that these are the best songs about these topics that have ever been written. And so in a matter of a few years, he's put in the same plane, so to speak, as the Beatles. So, which is a really interesting, profound phenomenon, but it was on the back of the quality of his protest songs that people really paid attention to him. And then just 4 years later, he's booed off stage, you could say, by people at the Folk Newport Festival. And that dynamic, what happened, is what the film is about. And to me, when I left the film, this was the most interesting question for me. What and why, in a sense. So let me make things a little more concrete. I'm going to read to you 4 lyrics that Dylan wrote in this protest period, just so you get a sense if you haven't been Dylanized as I have, or you might have not listened to some of these songs for a while. This is what he was singing in those 4 years as a sample. And forgive me, I'm not going to do Timothy Chalamet on you. I'm just going to read them. So, Dylan sang, "Hey, hey, Woody Guthrie, I wrote you a song about a funny old world that's a-comin' along. Seems sick and it's hungry and it's tired and it's torn. It looks like it's a-dyin' and it's hardly been born." Another song he wrote, Let me ask you one question. Is your money that good? Will it buy you forgiveness? Do you think that it could? I think you will find when your death takes its toll, all the money you made will never buy back your soul. The deputy sheriffs, the soldiers, the governors get paid, and the marshals and cops get the same. But the poor white man's used in the hands of them all like a tool. He's taught in his school from the start by the rule that the laws are with him to protect his white skin, to keep up his hate so he never thinks straight about the shape that he's in. But it ain't him to blame, he's only a pawn in their game. And one more sample. In the 1960s came the Vietnam War. Can somebody tell me what we're fighting for? So many young men died, so many mothers cried. Now I ask the question, was God on our side? So this is how he made his bread and butter in those early years. People really, really loved what he was saying in those times. So fast forward to the climax of the movie. It's 1965. He's playing at the Newport Folk Festival, and he sings at that moment. Well, I try my best to be just like I am, but everybody wants you to be just like them. They say, sing while you slave, and I just get bored. And I ain't gonna work on Maggie's farm no more. And then he gets booed off. And the booing proceeds for years and then. So, to me, it seems like politics or political topics and conversation were, in the reaction and how people handle politics, is what caused this rift amongst people in the folk community and how they perceived Dylan and why they had issues with him. Which again brings me back to that initial question I've been really wondering about. In one way, do politics belong in Zen and Zen practice? There's a contemporary philosopher, Slavoj Žižek, who is kind of known in the philosophy circles as a bad boy of philosophy because he likes stirring up trouble, asking people questions they're often uncomfortable with. And at one point he turned his philosophical eye towards Buddhism as a whole, and he wrote, although Buddhism presents itself as the remedy for the stressful tension of capitalist dynamics, allowing us to uncouple and retain inner peace, it actually functions as capitalism's perfect ideological supplement. The Western Buddhist meditative path is arguably the most efficient way for us to fully participate in capitalist dynamics while retaining the appearance of mental sanity. And then there I was minding my own business when Nate forwarded me an article from Tricycle Magazine from the spring, in which a long-standing professor of philosophy and I don't know if it was Zen practitioner or Buddhist practitioner, he was thinking about that Zizek critique of Buddhism. And part of his response to that critique was focusing upon the individual to the exclusion of the socio-political justifies the kinds of criticism aimed at Western Buddhism by Slavoj Žižek. Buddhism on this reading becomes simply a form of passive nihilism that seeks to create meaning for the individual by social withdrawal, leaving the social and political to the forces that dominate society. So he's making an argument that unless you want to withdraw from the world's problems, we have to engage directly with politics. And I've been thinking a lot about that too. If I consider the question of enlightenment, it seems to me that morality and cultivating morality seems like it ought to be part of the package that quote unquote an enlightened being has or has access to. That to not cultivate morality at this moment would be a problem. But that's new perspective. Historically, Zen was not concerned with morality, or not directly. But anyway, that's a question of history. I'm just saying that it's not a simple question whether and to what extent, in what way does morality fit into Zen practice. But currently, it seems many people are taking a position that morality is something we should practice directly. And I'm saying, well, to do that, you have to work with politics. That's where moral issues come from. But I think we all know from our own lived experience that, maybe I shouldn't speak for anybody. I know from my own personal experience that dealing with these questions is dangerous and fraught. So a koan I have for us to sit with and consider is, if we must engage in politics, how can we do better than we're currently doing as a society as a whole? And let me let that question linger just for a little bit. Take a minute to sit with it. If we must engage in politics, how can we do better than our current strategies? One long-standing Zen principle that I've tried to practice and often failed at was this principle of, at least don't make it worse. If I could just do that, then that's a kind of winning already. But looking outside the window, at our current political moment, I feel like even people with really good intentions are also simultaneously making things worse. So why, and how can we not make things worse? So at this moment, if this is sort of a public confession of sorts, like what is it that I do and what questions ought we consider, I always get to a point where I feel like I found, it's not exactly a life hack, but in terms of Zen practice, I always say, okay, all that's come before, yada yada, blah blah blah, and then what would happen if we added emptiness to the equation? Because for me, emptiness or the teaching of emptiness, if I were to get rid of everything else, I would say that's the thing that makes Zen Zen. And I know that's a little bit of an essentialist statement, but as far as fundamental pillars go, to me, it's what differentiates Zen from many of the other world religions. This principle or insight that everything depends and originates in relationship and in response to everything else, and therefore does not have a solid place to either ground to stand on or anything solid that you could grasp onto. That's the idea behind emptiness. So what if we add that to this equation? Lucky for me, the Zen masters of old have done a lot of thinking about this. So I'd like to quote Pai Cheng when he was thinking about freedom. And here I think freedom manifests as the word liberation. In Zen circles, we talk a lot and are interested quite a bit about liberation. So this is what he says. What is liberation of mind and liberation in all places? The master said, don't seek Buddha, don't seek Dharma, don't seek Sangha. Don't seek virtue, knowledge, and intellectual understanding. When sensations of defilement and purity are abolished through non-seeking, don't hold on to this non-seeking and consider it correct. Do not dwell at the point of ending, and do not long for heavens or fear hells. When you are unhindered by bondage and freedom, then this is called liberation of mind and body in all places. When the mind of purity and impurity is ended, it does not dwell in bondage, nor does it dwell in liberation. It has no mindfulness of doing, non-doing, bondage, or liberation. Then, although it remains in the world of samsara, that mind is free. So it should be startling at least, and maybe very provocative and intense sounding to hear a Zen master say, don't seek Buddha, don't seek Dharma, don't seek Sangha, don't seek virtue. I'll let you all sit with that. Bob Dylan, it's so fascinating to me. He's now on a never-ending tour, which started decades ago, and basically he lives his life now just going from place to place, singing his songs without stop. He's just, it's called the never-ending tour. And so I think of him now as a wanderer. And conveniently enough, the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche has a passage in one of his books called The Wanderer Speaks. And like with much of what Nietzsche wrote in the 1870s, 1880s, It's stunning to me how prophetic his words were when applied just 100 years later, even though he had no idea of what was coming. And so I want to read to you this short passage, which obviously Nietzsche is not writing about Bob Dylan because Bob Dylan wasn't born yet, but it feels to me as almost as though he were. And here, please remember, he's writing from Europe, so he's writing about Europe, but replace Europe with contemporary United States and see what happens. So Nietzsche writes, "If one would like to see our European morality for once as it looks from a distance, and if one would like to measure it against other moralities, past and future, then one has to proceed like a wanderer who wants to know how high the towers in town are. He leaves the town. Thoughts about moral prejudices, if they are not meant to be prejudices about prejudices, presuppose a position outside morality, some point beyond good and evil, to which one has to rise, climb, or fly. And in the present case, at least a point beyond our good and evil, a freedom from everything, quote, European, by which I mean the sum of the imperious value judgments that have become part of our flesh and blood. That one wants to go precisely out there, up there, may be a minor madness, a peculiar and unreasonable you must. For we seekers of knowledge, the question is whether one really can get up there. To do this, one must have liberated oneself from many things that oppress, inhibit, hold down, and make heavy precisely us Europeans today." So slightly paraphrased, Nietzsche is inviting us to think, well, if we're going to see ourselves clearly, then we have a lot of hard work to do because we are embedded and ensconced in all these pre-existing causes and conditions that prevent us from seeing clearly. So we have to metaphorically leave town. But how do you do that? So, is Bob Dylan a Zen master? Or in what ways might we see some Zen master in Bob Dylan? And I want to read you one more song that Dylan wrote. This one is in 1964. In which he's taking what I would call the Zen backward step and looking at himself now just a few years into his career as a protest songwriter and as an advocate for social justices or injustices. And this is what he writes or sings. Crimson flames tied through my ears, rollin' high in mighty traps, pounced with fire on flaming roads, using ideas as my maps. We'll meet on the edges soon, said I, proud, neath heated brow. Ah, but I was so much older then. I'm younger than that now. Half-racked prejudice leaped forth. Rip down all hate, I screamed. Lies that life is black and white spoke from my skull, I dreamed. Romantic facts of musketeers foundationed deep somehow. Ah, but I was so much older then. I'm younger than that now. A a self-ordained professor's tongue, too serious to fool, spouted out that liberty is just equality in school. Equality, I spoke the word as if a wedding vow. Ah, but I was so much older then. I'm younger than that now. In the soldier's stance, I aimed my hand at the mongrel dogs who teach, fearing not that I'd become my enemy in the instant that I preach. Good and bad, I define these terms quite clear, no doubt, somehow. Ah, but I was so much older then, I'm younger than that now. And so the last thought I have for you before I invite your own reflections on some of Dylan's words. In this question of is what we're hearing from Dylan somehow Zen, or in what ways is it Zen? I'd like to offer that the fact that he was politically and deeply politically engaged with the social issues of his time is not what makes him a Zen practitioner or Zen master. The fact that he renounced politics in a significant way, that does not make him a Zen master either. To me, it seems like if you're going to make a case of Dylan as a Zen master, it's that he recognized quite early in his life that the truth of dependent origination, the truth of emptiness, and that the times had changed, and that he needed to change too, or he'd sink like a stone. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, author of the Gulag Archipelago, wrote, "The line separating good and evil passes not through states, nor between classes, nor between political parties either, but right through every human heart."
Could you read that again?
Sure.
Thank you.
The line separating good and evil passes not through states, nor between classes, nor between political parties either, but right through every human heart. So, those are my prepared remarks. I'm curious how they land with you and what thoughts they encouraged.
I'm really interested in your point of view. This has been amazing because I drank up that movie and I went and listened to a vinyl I have of Newport in '63 of everyone on stage, and the songs are powerful and they really hit me hard right now because it's so good to hear protest songs, people who were really calling out what it felt like to go to war in Vietnam and what it felt like to be an African American in the US in the '60s. And so the value of the protest songs is powerful, but what and I want more of that for us now, frankly. But then you saw their faces when Dylan wasn't delivering what they expected of him, and the anger and hate. And that was so alarming and a reminder of how we don't want to be when we don't go as we expect them to. So I'm curious, how did you make sense of how everyone in that audience who drank him up and loved him so much in 61 were throwing things at him and being violent in 65? How do you explain that shift in these loving hippie 60s folks?
Yeah, that's really Clayton, like why this movie, like I insisted on like thinking about it. As entertaining as all the other stuff was, that's the thing. And the film takes a little bit of poetic license because it conflates a bunch of stuff that happened over time into one scene, the one you're describing. But there's, in a concert that he did later, I think it was in 1966 when he was over in England, he was doing the same thing, like playing electric songs and getting booed. And the film captures this. Somebody in the crowd yells, "Judas," which is a famous moment in rock and roll history. But when you just asked me that, it occurred to me that Dylan's response is brilliant, because he says in response to Judas, being called Judas, "I don't believe you." And I think that works on so many levels, the way great poets work. But I think one of the things he's kind of calling out there is the problem with the problem that people fall into, the trap they fall into, is somehow one of belief. And you take something that Zen teaches us is like morality. It's like we want it to be one thing that's solid and true forever. But that's not what reality gives us. And so despite all the complexities, as soon as you believe and want to believe in something, you start calcifying. So that even the man who gave you the things that you prize the most, like love and hate, when love and hate is like based on a belief in something rather than the active movement of everything, it's so easy to turn love into hate out of some solidifying into belief. And I think that's what Dylan was calling out, like morality isn't about belief. It's about doing and action and all the things that make it complicated. And it feels deeply, deeply tragic and sad that this is what happens.
Thank you.
Rosemary has her hand up.
Hi, Shish, thank you. I have to say that it would be so nice to hear more of Dylan's words spoken, because it's just, the music is wonderful, but there's something different when it's only the words. And I really got goosebumps when you were reading, especially my back pages. And whether he is, one could see him as a Zen master. I remembered this quote, or I was reminded of this quote from Suzuki Roshi. So the secret is just to say yes and jump off from here. And there's no problem. It means to be yourself, always yourself, without sticking to an old self. And when you said, he's a wanderer now, and actually saw him maybe 7-8 years ago in Brooklyn. And in his own book, I think the only one he wrote about himself, the Chronicles, his early days before he came to New York, he said, "I'm a folk expeditionary." And he would just go around listening to old records. And so I see, yes, he is, by that definition, a Zen master, allowing himself to evolve despite what Clayton was saying about, we're talking about idealization, you see, and that happens with us too, right, in our practice. And that enslaves the person you're idealizing, as well as yourself, in a way. Yeah, and then the morality piece, well, Dale Wright lists one of the 6 perfections, which Peg's going to be talking about soon, is morality. I haven't read that whole chapter, but it's interesting that it's there as one of the 6 perfections. For me, in terms of where we are politically, and there's such a divide, the divisiveness that we see, which reinforces the delusion of a separate self, and just being with people that, being interested and having the will to listen to people that don't particularly think the way I do in certain important areas, the will to do that and just understand just that piece right there. That would be something that I think could be very powerful. So last thing, Jane Hirschfield gave a talk about some of her poems in her new book yesterday, and should every day, who has a very steeped in Zen, every day I do something. It could be a postcard, it could be a letter, but every day I do something towards activism. So I thought that was interesting. Acceptance of Zen and activism. Thank you.
We have Genevieve. Whoops. Where did Genevieve go?
I don't know. I mean, I'm here.
Hold on, I'll find you. There you are.
Thank you for this provocative discourse and conversation. So many things have come up for me in the course of it, and I'd love to speak with you sometime about some of them. Dylan was a great American poet, and a pioneer of both writing and music, clearly. And in some ways, he reminds me of Picasso. Every time he created, he had his blue phase. Every time he created a certain kind of thing, he would then scrap it and go on to another kind of thing, which takes an extraordinary amount of courage, because you've created something that people like, and then you're going to go ahead and do something else they might not like. So there's something very courageous about living that way and not being attached, not holding one's own creations precious or being attached to being liked. And on the other hand, I wonder what Dylan has actually done. He's compared to what he said. I don't know. Did you watch the other way back 4-hour documentary on Dylan?
I've watched all the things.
My best friend for 30 years, and she died young, was Pete Seeger's niece. And I think it was Pete who unplugged Dylan at the Newport Folk Festival, or he told someone else to do it. And that seems to me a clear indication that people are afraid of change. It happened with bossa nova, believe it or not. There was a radical reaction to bossa nova in Brazil. It was going to it was like the Beatles. It was going to change everything. But when I watched that much older 4-hour documentary, there were aspects of Dylan that really troubled me. Like Joan Baez invited him to tour with her when she was, she was in the public eye and nobody knew who he was. And she just assumed that if he went on tour, he would invite her, but he didn't. He left her behind. And at some point he visited someone and stole a bunch of albums, and he wanted them as research. But what trouble, and I'm not saying that we don't all do things that are morally dubious at some point for some reason. But what troubled me was that so many, decades later, when asked about that, he showed no remorse. His response indicated that he felt he had a perfect right to do that. And I remember a Dharma talk that Anne gave in which she read something, and I can't remember what it was, but she asked, how do you know when someone's wise? There's that thing people do, like, what would so-and-so do? Like, well, who's the wise person and how do you know they're wise? And I think it's more about what would wisdom do than what would a person do. And I just want to call out that there's a difference between a person. Let's say there's a difference between a hero or someone who speaks about wisdom and wisdom itself.
And that's about the end of our time, if anyone has a burning question.
I wanted you to quickly define how you're using politics and how you're using morality.
I guess morality I think of as how we treat others. Meaning decisions we have to make that take into consideration other beings beyond ourselves, beyond the horizon of ourselves. And politics is maybe what happens when you zoom out a level and start seeing the network of these relationships and all of the moral calculus that's included, kind of like an ant colony. Like each ant is making individual decisions where to go, but it's not till you get the anthill that politics emerges.
Thank you.
So maybe a communal morality that keeps getting bigger, as the scale gets larger.
In offering incense, observing silence, and considering Zen and politics, we extend compassionate care to
Blood. Painting.
and all those who are gravely ill, lacking basic necessities, or suffering violence in the world, in thought, word, or deed. May they be serene through all their suffering, and may they, together with all beings, realize the awakened way.
Caught in a self-centered dream, only suffering, holding to self-centered thoughts, exactly the dream. Each moment, life as it is, the only teacher. Being just this moment, compassion's way. Caught in a self-centered dream, only suffering, holding to self-centered thoughts, exactly the dream. Each moment, life as it is, the only teacher. Being just this moment, compassion's way. Caught in the self-centered dream, only suffering, holding to self-centered thoughts, exactly the dream. Each moment, life as it is, the only teacher. Being just this moment, compassion's right.
Let us be respectfully reminded, life and death are of supreme importance. Time swiftly passes, and with it, our only chance. Each of us must strive to awaken. Be aware. Do not squander our life. Appamada's programs and facilities are supported through your generosity. Thank you for your support. There's the Dharma box for contributions in the kitchen, and also a link for contributions on the website.
For those who can, we'll go to Central Market to the second floor and figure out how we might change the world. Ramona, are you going to Central Market?
Yeah.
Oh, good.